quantum phenomena in that holographically encoded in it, it's the source of evil. It's going to destroy us if we don't recognize what it's revealing. And yet it's a quantum phenomena, just like light is either a wave or particle, depending on how it's observed. Wetiko is the source of the greatest evil, and it contains its own medicine. It actually contains its own healing, its own vaccine. And not only that, it actually is helping us to wake up, right? So how is Wetiko going to manifest? Is it going to take us down and kill us or wake us up? Well, it depends if we recognize what it's revealing to us. Now, Wetiko, one way of understanding Wetiko, it got created out of trauma. Because think about it, we're in this whole state, but we're unconscious of our wholeness. Something happens, an overwhelming experience, and we can't integrate it in the normal way. We can't symbolically express it in the normal way. So we dissociate, we split because it's so overwhelming. That's trauma. And if that split off part, if we don't integrate it, it goes sort of rogue and becomes, in psychology speak, what's called an autonomous complex. And indigenous people call that a demon. And this demon, and that is Wetiko, that autonomous complex, it develops in a way a quasi life or will seemingly of its own, contrary to the ego, right? So why I'm describing that's really trauma, where trauma is a sane response to an insane situation. Think about it. If I put too much pressure on my bone and the bone would break, the bone wasn't pathological. That was a healthy response to too much pressure. That's why trauma is a sane response to an insane situation. Now, the pathology of trauma, when we're traumatized, is the repetition compulsion. We just unconsciously recreate. We can't help but not to recreate the very trauma that we're trying to heal from in the compulsion to repeat the trauma. That's the pathology. That's the symptom. And yet encoded in our doing that, we're trying to remember something. We're trying to consciously experience the very moment of trauma that we weren't able to experience when it happened because it was so overwhelming, and we split, we dissociated. And so encoded in trauma is actually, in the pathology of trauma, we're actually trying to re-experience something so as to heal ourselves. And how is that trauma going to manifest? It could be tragic, and we spend the rest of our lives just compulsively reenacting our trauma in the repetition compulsion, or by enacting our trauma and bringing awareness to it and developing enough strength to stay present in it, we could actually then have a corrective experience and assimilate the trauma. And that energy that was fueling the compulsion to recreate the trauma all of a sudden becomes available for creative expression, and that's life transforming.
Yeah, and that creativity is the actual key to achieving that positive outcome, right? I mean, like, we have to dream that new reality, and that's the creative act.
Well, that's why in my third book on Wetiko, because I point out that this mind virus it's a dreamed up phenomenon. We are dreaming up collectively the madness in our world, whatever you call it, the Wetiko psychic epidemic, collective psychosis, whatever. And yet my third book in the trilogy of my Wetiko books is called Undreaming Wetiko, because I'm pointing out, well, we've dreamed up this insanity and we can undream. That's within our power to do that. And if we don't actually awaken to that, then, we're fated to destroy ourselves. It's really that simple.
One thing I wanted to ask you about is that on my show, we've often talked about UAPs, NHI, that sort of thing. And that's expanded over the years to include a lot of encounter kinds of experiences where people are, dealing with or, basically, encountering agency from outside of themselves and outside of what they view as the human species, or at least, the physical human species. What is your thought in terms of a minded universe and whether or not the universe has some agency independent of us, or what are your thoughts on that? I mean, is that a case?
Well, I have a couple of thoughts. Like in quantum physics, they point out, like, one physicist talks about, it's like the game of 20 questions, where everybody goes out of the room except like one person leaves and everybody decides on a word, and then the person comes back and then by a series of questions, is it bigger than a bread box, is it an animal or a mineral, whatever, they then can guess the word. Well, but in the quantum, sort of like this version of 20 questions, the person goes out, and what if everybody decides, let's not decide on any word at all, but however we answer the question will determine the answer. So the person asks the question, and every answer takes longer and longer to answer, you know, and then the person might guess something, and and there's an actual story one physicist tells, and everybody starts laughing because by them questioning, they created the very answer they got. And this physicist who had this experience says, well, the questions we asked determined the word that, at that moment got conjured up, but that's only part of it, because in a quantum experiment, the whole rest of the universe is involved too. So we can't just determine, we're not 100% in charge of like the answers we're going to get back. So the point is this, that's a roundabout way of getting to your question, because for example, in my next book, I'm already almost finishing my next book, and it's about the greatest discovery in the 20th century in psychology, according to Jung, which is the reality of the psyche. And in other words, the psyche is, analytically speaking, the most real thing in the world. And the point being, we experience, like for Jung, who discovered in his own way the reality of the psyche, there were living beings inside of